The clock ticks down. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The ball drops. The calendar flips. It's now 2001. We just survived Y2J. I mean, the Y2K. And one man was ready to change football forever. Vince McMahon. Fresh off the success of the Attitude Era, he introduced a brand new football league, the XFL. A league built on smash mouth football, passionate fans, no fair catches, and players earning more money when they won. 8 teams would take the field: the Birmingham Thunderbolts, Chicago Enforcers, Las Vegas Outlaws, Los Angeles Extreme, the Memphis Maniacs, the New York, New Jersey Hitman, the Orlando Rage, and the San Francisco Demons. On a Saturday night in January 2001, Las Vegas became the center of the football world as Vince McMahon welcomed America to something they've never seen before. But this just wasn't football. It carried the unmistakable DNA of the WWF. Jim Ross and Jared the King Lawler traded wrestling rings for the broadcast booth, and WWF superstars became part of the presentation. And years before becoming the co-owner of today's UFL, The Rock stepped onto the XFL stage and let the fans know exactly what was cooking. One unforgettable season. It changed the way people looked at spring football. And 25 years later, its legacy is still debated. So grab a drink and check your pulse.
Do I not currently have a pulse? Yes, I do. Let's play football.
Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is the XFL. Welcome, everyone. This is a first time. Maybe we do more. Who knows? But we survived the Y2J, Y2K, and we're in the year 2001. So let me introduce the people joining us for this panel discussion tonight of WWF and XFL from 2001. We have my real life brother and tag team partner, Booking Like a Mark. We also have Royce. We have Mike. I'm going to unmute everyone so y'all can say hi.
Hey. That was a great intro, Rick. Great intro.
Top tier work, brother. You got me hyped up. I'm ready to watch some He Hate Me highlights now.
Well, that's what's funny about this. I mean, if you look back, you had He Hate Me, and you had there's stuff we still remember, and this is 25 years ago. And the inspiration was a gentleman named Mark, because he's covering 2001 for his wrestling podcast this year of the WWF, ECW, WCW Invasion. So first I'm going to pass around so everyone gets to know you guys real quick. I'll start off with Mark, then we'll do Royce and Mike, and then we'll go from there.
So, as Eric said, I am his real-life brother. We've been watching wrestling for over 25 years, so we actually started right before this period. And booking is another way of talking about wrestling storylines. My name is Mark, and a wrestling fan is also called Mark, so booking like a Mark is just a natural fit for me. Mike, what's your backstory?
So me, I'm mouthing off with Mike. I as well have a wrestling podcast, but I am also a side of 4 sides of the ring, and we've all come together to create this beautiful adopted online family that has turned into a beautiful in real life family. So I'm proud to be an honorary stepbrother of Rick and Mark here. I'm like the unknown brother, the one that got lost at sea all those years ago. They don't know what happened to him. They're like, where'd we find this guy? But that's me, man.
That's awesome. And I'm Royce with Viking Wax Press. I'm mainly the football content guy here. I cover the UFL, have covered some I do football card videos, football helmet ranking videos, and things like that. But I'm part of Rick's team on the alternative football panel too. So happy always to talk football. Don't know very much about wrestling, but I do get that connection from the XFL and how integral that was in building modern spring football.
And I think you summed it up great, Royce, because I think we all are a little, Mark was saying before, hey, I have to do my quick spark notes on the XFL and you with the wrestling. So what's good about this is I made it kind of general with the questions, so you don't have to go crazy. And what I'll do is for each segment, I'll kind of set the stage so we kind of know what we're doing with. So the first segment is basically why revisit the original XFL 25 years later. So let me set the stage for you. It's 2001. The WWF is at its peak with the Attitude Era. And Stone Cold Steve Austin was one of them. And football was America's biggest sport. Vince McMahon believed football could be done differently, and different stuff started happening. So you had NBC partnership that worked out with it. NBC had lost the NFL rights after 1997. WWF was at its peak. You had Raw on TNN, which aired XFL games. You had SmackDown on UPN, which aired XFL games. NBC was looking for sports programming, and it feared the fear of XFL leave. The NFL was about to have a labor dispute too, going into 2001. So they thought, WWF wanted football, and then everything came together with Vince McMahon, and you had 8 crazy team names. Like, you can never have a team called the Maniacs. It worked in 01. It doesn't work now. And it was all about smash mouth, beat 'em up football. So it was great to see it all. And I do have a couple questions. So like I said, we're going to keep them a little vague, but keep everyone involved. So I'll let you guys handle. I'm going to throw a bunch out. You can handle whatever you want based off of what you know. So the questions for the first one is: did wrestling's popularity create unrealistic expectations? Could anyone have competed with the NFL in 2001? And was the XFL built to compete with the NFL or capitalize if the NFL stumbled? Roy, since you're more the football guy, I'm going to have you take this first, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I don't know that anybody could compete with the NFL, but I do love the fact that they tried right when they were about to have a dispute. I think it was kind of genius, and to put a twist on it, and it was so hyped in a good way. Like, honestly, nobody could have done it better as far as hyping goes, that it was a thing. I mean, nationwide, everybody kind of knew it, even though, now not a lot of the population really understands that there's modern spring leagues happening. Back then they did. I really believe that most of the nation had heard of the XFL just because of that huge wrestling connection and the hype that it brought. So the timing was genius, and the way they pushed it out was kind of genius too. So I appreciate it, and I know that it rubbed maybe some people the wrong way because it wasn't as pure football as they were used to. But I kind of loved the fact that they were trying new things. I mean, just the fact that they didn't have a kickoff was awesome. Those kind of things I thought were just fun for me as a football fan to see a new angle at it. I mean, I got into it and had a good time with it, and wished it would have lasted longer. So I don't know if that answered all the questions, but
yeah, that's what I said. I'm going to keep them vague, but I'll give you guys a couple so you guys pick and choose, and we can keep a discussion, going off of that. And Mike, coming from a wrestling perspective, what's your thoughts on everything?
I think, it's an interesting dynamic back then in the early 2000s, the late 90s, early 2000s. And I think we've all been together when I've said, like, during that time, the people longed for violence it was a very, heavy metal was really starting to take off in the mainstreams. Alternative music was really big. That thrasher kind of mentality, that vibe was very prevalent in that, late 90s, early 2000s, and I'm not surprised that a billionaire like Vince would look at the NFL and look at a product that was, I wouldn't say like, like kind of like Sunday school compared to public school type of vibe. But like, you look at the NFL during that time, we still had big hits. It's not like the NFL we know today where, hey, here's a 15-yard penalty for, roughing the passer and you gently laid him down on the ground. Back then, you could spear a guy out of his helmet and, hey, we're playing ball. In XFL, you could pick up the guy and drop him on his head and then score a touchdown. So I understand how wrestling going into the Attitude Era caused a billionaire with extra money who maybe wanted to capitalize on the NFL's weakness at that time to do this and invite us all into something that 25 years later, here we are still talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, wrapping up everything, and we kind of, I think I was more about the XFL in 01, and I think you were more on the wrestling. So I'd like to get your take on this. I mean, because we grew up watching it and everything, and it was on UPN, stuff like that, same as SmackDown. So what's your take on everything?
So if you go talk to a lot of wrestling historians, 2000 and 2001 were really the boom period for the WWE, then the WWF, of course. And the XFL, the first game, was less than 2 weeks after that 2001 Royal Rumble. When Stone Cold won his third one, it was on the road to arguably the greatest, the biggest WrestleMania of all time, headlined by Rock and Austin. Wrestling, and that was WWF's peak. If you even look at their numbers, after that WrestleMania, they dropped off a bit. So the XFL debuted in that hottest period. But because it was so hot, Vince McMahon was all about experimentation. So you like the old school video games, I'm going to hit you with an old one. WWF Betrayal came out 2001, the same year as the XFL's debut. And it wasn't a regular wrestling game. It was a side-scrolling beat-em-up game. You were Rock, Stone Cold, Undertaker, or Triple H, and you had to rescue Stephanie McMahon, who had been kidnapped. And you're just going through the arena, beating up guards and concession guys. A completely different game, but experimentation. They still had a wrestling title that year, but they had a side-scrolling beat-em-up. If you look, 2000 was the year they opened WWF New York, the restaurant, right? All of a sudden now you could actually go as a wrestling fan to a place with a wrestling-themed menu, wrestling memorabilia, and you could watch the wrestling shows. So the WWF was really expanding outside of just wrestling. I'll hit you with two more. The first WWE Studios movie. Oh, it's hard to see now on my green screen, but it was not The Marine with John Cena. It was actually The Scorpion King, which came out in 2001 starring The Rock. So they were even starting to branch into movies at the time. And of course, in 2001 was the first season of Tough Enough. So WWF's expansion into reality television. So you look in the bubble, the XFL was really just one example of Vince taking the WWF's resources and expanding and trying new things.
I gotta say, this was awesome because everyone here just brought a totally different perspective, and this is totally what I wanted. But you guys bring up such good points, and it's completely true how nothing could compete back in 01. Yet he thought I'm gonna go for it, and he was riding the wave of what was happening with the WWF, and he was able to get his broadcast partners. I mean, TNN and UPN. He was already broadcasting on those. And it was kind of good. They could cross promotion and say, hey, this is our matchup this week and so on. So it definitely was good. He had the network to help him. I think the only part was he had more wrestling people than football people, which is kind of funny how then when he tried to do it the second time around, this time he's like, oh, I need a commissioner of football and not of the WWE. So I think he did learn his lessons too from the first time. But definitely was interesting, and that's why I put in there too. You had, if you ever just go watch some of the games back, you had JR and the King calling a football game. Now, I know them from calling Monday Night Raw, and here they are calling a football game. And granted, it was still entertaining. The King was still his character, looking for different scenery, and you had JR, being solid, calling the plays down the middle. So it was just a fantastic to go back and watch. You also had Jesse Ventura. He was a commentator. He was mayor of Minnesota, or governor of Minnesota at that time.
Yeah.
And at one point, he was just busting a coach's chops. And you couldn't tell if he was blurring the line between this is actually scripted, like a WWF show, or if he legit didn't like this coach. And you can never tell. It was the New York Hitman. And it was almost like every week, too, they would make sure that Jesse Ventura was calling Hitman games. And when they would go down to the sideline to do interviews and stuff, he would poke. So very fascinating just to go back and watch any of this stuff. So going to the next section, which I kind of talked a little about there too, the WWF influence there. So you have dark, aggressive teams like Demons. I mean, granted, you do have, I want to say Arizona State, right?
Sun
No,
Devils.
those are
Yep.
Sun Devils.
Sun Devils, yeah.
But you had the Maniacs. You had a Hitman. I mean, you can never use a Hitman today as as a team name. Wouldn't fly. You had a lot of teams were dark colors. You had the Demons, black and red. You had New Jersey, black and blue. You also had player nicknames like Mike talked about. You had He Hate Me. It was in Major League Baseball. They used to have a weekend where you could put a nickname on a jersey. It started in the XFL. Can you imagine Aaron Judge wearing a jersey saying He Hit Me?
Iconic.
You had XFL or the XFL had WWF announcers. They had Jesse Ventura as lead analysis. And it appeared you had appearances by The Rock. Some games he would go on the Titantron and just get the crowd going. Even when the teams came out, they had an announcer like he was announcing a pay-per-view, and they would shoot fire up and fireworks. Granted, teams do that now, but this legit felt like you were watching like almost like a video game where you would hear their name over a PA system and everything. You also had the camera work and production style. That's where sideline interviewing started. In WWF, they would backstage interview people and so. I think of The Rock, and I think of Michael Cole as an example. Well, in the XFL, they would have a person interviewing. I think one time they interviewed a person. Why didn't you catch the ball? I mean, it was just a little more aggressive in the face, which you wouldn't see in the NFL. And then you had storytelling. I mean, if on some games, if teams had a chance to win, if you won, you got more money. And they would hype up that, oh my God, they're going to kick a field goal. The first game of the season in San Francisco, they had no timeouts and they kicked the field goal with 1 second left. And because of that, the team won and they got their extra bonus. So they hyped it up. It was storytelling. So my questions is how the league blurred the line between sports and entertainment. Actually, that's more of a thought. Did the WWF influence hurt or help the league's credibility? Were the moments like Jesse Ventura arguing with coaches genuine or TV drama? And was the XFL marketed as a football league with wrestling elements or a wrestling show with football? I'm going to actually, since Mark's ended last time, I'm going to kick it off with Mark. What's your take on this?
Well, if you're going to do the alternative to the NFL, then you need to be an alternative. So they took a lot of the things that Vince considered boring, right? He even said, NFL is the no fun league. We're going to be the extra fun league. And they were trying to amp all of that. And him being the wrestling promoter, it was all about larger than life characters, right? Because you're going to watch the football, but you're going to stay for the personalities. And hopefully that's what's going to build and that's what's going to get you coming back. The NFL has all this history built upon, right? I'm a Cowboys fan. I'll be a Cowboys fan for life. But by the time I started watching football, they were established. This was brand new ground level. So really you needed a big explosion at the beginning to attract the eyeballs. And that's why he figured Rock, Austin, JR, King, all these wrestling fans, like I said, it was the boom period of wrestling. Hopefully now you're getting the initial audience. And then if the football is good enough, that audience will continue to watch. Unfortunately, history proves that wasn't the case. But this was really, it was like the billboard. It was meant to get your attention. And then the football was meant to keep your focus. But it's debatable if it worked.
Speaking of attracting the eyeballs, the cheerleaders at that time for the XFL were, I was singles, so it definitely attracted my eyes to the television.
See?
And it's funny, Royce, you bring that up because at one point, because the ratings were low, they even had we're going to take a camera into the women's locker room, which would never be allowed. And they basically just teased the whole thing and everything.
Yeah.
But another point of TV drama and stuff, just to get the ratings up. And Royce, what's your take on everything? I'd love to hear it.
I think it was almost. I think it could have used an Oliver Luck kind of presence to be lasting. I love the fact that it was unique and definitely explored the hype of wrestling and the angles of wrestling and just the drama and glamour of it all. But in a way, I think it probably would have lasted a little longer had they had somebody with a little more football push to keep it going. I don't know that for sure, but I wonder, like, Oliver Luck to me was the perfect guy to come in at the next iteration of XFL and lead the thing. So could have somebody like that made a difference and made it a little more well-rounded? I don't know. But it was, to me, it was such a fun experiment that it's almost like it was an explosion, and that was good that I mean, I wanted to stay around, but in a way it's so iconic now because it hit like a bomb and was gone, so it's kind of the way I look at it historically.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Mike, what about you, bud?
I think if Vince could, he would have scripted every single one of these games. If Vince could have had full control over the XFL, we would have seen some of the most egregious fixed football games. And I think that's why at times, like you said, with, Jesse the Body, getting in the coach's face and some of those like entertainment promos, that those interviews, I think that's why at times it felt a little bit too much like the soap opera drama of the WWF at the time, as opposed to a alternative football league. But at the same time, they had to differentiate themselves, from the NFL, from what everybody had known and seen. I think that analogy is great. Royce had. I think it literally is. It was a bomb. Like, this bomb hits crazy, leaves an insane impact, and then it's gone. There's the mushroom cloud in the sky, and that's it. It dissipates. It's gone. Like, that's such a wild, thought when you look at it. I 100% think if Vince could, he would have scripted every single game.
But how do we know that he didn't?
That's the part right there, right?
Scripted?
Right. That's the beauty of it. Just because you think about now sports gambling and everything, back in the day, it was all shady. You had to go talk to your bookie on the corner behind the alley. But they always talked. Eric spoke about it very freely about if you won the game, you got more money. So what's to say the other team wasn't in on it and then they split the extra winnings, right? We don't know. That's a whole separate behind the scenes part. And I think that may have been part of why it declined in popularity, is there was always that sneaking suspicion in the back of your mind. Was it real or was it scripted?
Yeah, and that's a good point. And here's another thing. I don't know if you guys know this, but there was one point, speaking of scripted shows, they would play on Saturday nights, and it would be a tie-in to Saturday Night Live. Well, there was a game, they had an overtime that was very almost like the rules now, like a shootout style. Well, it kept on going and going, and on Saturday Night Live that week was Jennifer Lopez. So NBC was not happy because it ran over into Saturday Night Live, and that kind of was one of the reasons too. NBC was like, hey, this is Saturday Night Live. We have Jennifer Lopez here, and we have the XFL that's going into our time now. So it's just funny too to see different stuff that happens, and I mean, it was, if you go back, I want to say it was Orlando Rage against Chicago, maybe. Great game, and it was only like week 2 of the season, so you wouldn't have expected them to be a shootout, but it was very ahead of its time. Some games and some other games where it's like you really need to stick to going back to being a teacher because you can't throw football. But going on to the next part, The XFL has some awesome football innovations, and it's stuff that actually, if you start to think about, it's stuff we have now. So what debuted or gained main attention was you had the Skycam. You had referee microphones. You had wire players. You had behind the scenes access. You had the opening scramble. You had different. It was like a different kickoff. They had live locker rooms, cameras. They also had no fair catch. So a lot of the stuff I think I just mentioned too, you stop and think, wow, that's in today's ESPN, that's in CBS, it's on Fox, it's in all the channels you watch. They all have the Skycam now. So it's crazy to think stuff that he thought about that wasn't in the NFL that they actually went with. So I'm going to start off with Mike with this, and here's the questions I prepared for this. So, was the innovations eventually which innovation was the biggest success? Which one was ahead of its time? And which ideals deserve more credit today?
Man, I mean, oh my God. Genuinely, I think the no kickoff. I think that's top of my list. I think look at what the NFL did with the kickoff rules over the last few years and how stupid that is, right? Like having no kickoff, I think is fantastic. I think, to be honest with you, I think the entire XFL at this version of it was ahead of its time. There's one name that sits in my head that I think about when we look at sports today, that if the XFL came in this era, I think we would see them thrive more than '01, and that's the Savannah Bananas Baseball League. The Savannah Bananas came in to professional baseball, and lit baseball on fire. It turned a boring America's pastime into a rave, a concert, a Broadway play, a breakdown dancing. Imagine the XFL with the presentation it had then in this time. I think the entire XFL itself was ahead of its time. If it comes in 2020, the 2020s, like the Bananas did, and they have a similar approach. Maybe we were a little bit more extreme, with the contact because of how softened the NFL is. I think the XFL might have maybe stayed in business a little bit longer.
I agree. And Royce, do you want to educate Mike about the current NFL kickoff rule? Where did that come from?
That came from the XFL from 2020 or 2021. Yeah. So they have adopted a lot of the modern spring football rules into the XFL or into the NFL. Sorry. And then some of the arena leagues, like the TAL, it's a 7-on-7 football league that does, instead of a kickoff, they do a throw off where you're throwing it instead of kicking it. So I think that's a morph of the 2021 XFL. Instead of the scrimmage, they're doing a throw off. But that kind of thing, I think it was such a unique opportunity for football to experiment. And you kind of see little waves of that hitting later iterations of the spring football and arena football leagues and things like that. So I also like in the original XFL, they had overtimes. You would get it at the 20 and have 4 chances. You wouldn't have any kickoffs or anything like that. You would just have 4 tries to get it in, and the other team would have 4 tries. And so that was unique too. Like the NFL wasn't doing anything like that. So I just love the fact that they were trying new stuff. And as a football fan, actually I started becoming a spring football fan back in the 80s, and the USFL was doing things like a 2-pointer conversion when the NFL didn't have it. And then challenge rules. So I love the fact that the USFL experimented in the 80s, and then the XFL 1.0 picked that up again and started experimenting more. So it was fun as a football fan to watch those things. But
Royce,
yeah,
do you feel like any of the innovations from '01, anything that sticks out in your head that was game changing or just ahead of its time that now you look back and think, wow, this is incredible that we have?
I think the access, for one, the sideline access, it was awesome. I mean, insight that the NFL was not giving and still kind of doesn't give. The UFL does a great job with it. I think maybe a little too much, but um, I think that was the I guess the personal side of it, where you got to hear what these players are saying and thinking. I mean, I remember them interviewing He Hate Me and learning who Rod Smart was for the first time, and why, those kind of things. They would do like sideline live interviews when the guy just came off the field, and I'd never seen anything like that before. So I love that, just the personal side of it. So that's what I think I am glad to see continuing, and I know that's where it started.
I think that's a really good take too. Mark, what about you, bud?
Well, you might have seen me laughing a second ago. As I explained, I think it was off camera earlier. I wasn't really familiar as much with the XFL. I didn't remember a lot of it, so I was doing some research, and I just came across the fun storyline of the opening scramble, which I forgot about, and how like one of the very first ones, a player got hurt and missed the whole only XFL season of the original iteration because of that. And it's great that it was a experiment. What's the term I'm looking for? A litmus test almost for different things to try. But there was also so many failures that the XFL had. And if you look back at how throughout the course of that initial season, they were even changing the rules as they went. And that almost, when you're trying to get into it, it takes away some of the legitimacy, because you kind of stop and think, well, shouldn't you have thought all of this out before the first kickoff of the first game? But it was growing, it was evolving. And you don't see that in sports a lot of times. You have to wait until the end of a season. You have the rules committee. They come through, they review everything, and they make their decisions. And this one, it was like, wait, something's not working. Let's try something else. So I
what's crazy about though? That the Rapoli, and Rick knows, Rick 8-Bit knows, that the new UFL commissioner, or not commissioner, but co-owner, does the same kind of stuff, because he's changing rules mid-season and trying out, okay, we now have a 4-point field goal, that kind of stuff. He's kind of in that same vein, taking the ball and running with it as far as experimentation goes, and I love it. Like, it's a little scary because changing the rules mid-season seems like, hey, you could do that, but
yeah,
he does.
So why not?
Mark, I totally forgot about that, so I'm glad you brought that up, because when it did happen in the season, there was they have an overtime. It was Louisville Kings, and there was 2 penalties back to back on the defense, and because of that, they lost. And then the next week, they changed it, like 24 hours later, changed the rule. Then, wouldn't you know, the Louisville Kings would be in overtime again, and this time they would win because of the rule. So it's very funny that you brought that up too, to show stuff still changing from 01, now 25 years later. And the fact that Mike brings up the kickoff too, different stuff. So it's just crazy to see how still the current UFL is kind of shaping up, or XFL of 2020 is shaping up at current NFL. And that's, it's still mind-blowing if you start to really think about it.
And it's so hard to find a balance, because we talked on our show last night on the alternative football panel about maybe bringing a commissioner into the league that can give it a little more balance and a little less of that unknown that Rapoli brings. But at the same time, I kind of love what Rapoli brings, and that like wild card side of it, that you just don't know what he's going to do. And as a football fan, it's scary but fun, so it reminds me of wrestling that way. It just does.
I'm going to run through the comments real quick, because we only have a couple segments left. We were talking about the panel. You can watch us every other Tuesday. We have shows, and right now you can watch us on YouTube as well. They commented, love the scramble, till I saw how dangerous it was. Yes. Then we also had a couple. It was wild how Vince always wanted to go to war with the NFL, which is true, very true. And then for Mike, we had some representation from 4 Sides of the Ring podcast.
Shout out.
Mike will be on that podcast tomorrow night, and Mark was a panelist last week. So we still help each other out. We're always on each other's shows. Run 68 Bone, he's one of our panelists for the AFP. The Orlando Rage for Life. He was so happy about that. do I have a pulse thing. So I made sure I put in that clip just for we get to hear it. And
That's a great clip.
Thanks, Rock Renegade. Yeah, that recap, I thought it was great. Really summed up almost everything to a T. And with my own voice, knock on wood, I shouldn't have issues. I will say I did have one video when I first did the XFL. I did AFN throwback beginning of the season, and I had a really good video for the first season, our first game of the season, and 6 seconds got flagged because I incorporated someone's voice in Stanford. So I had to make sure this one I used my own voice. So now we're on to our segment for why it failed. So you had the ratings collapse. You had the football quality wasn't that great. Too much hype. It confused identity. NBC had high expectations. So my questions for you guys are: what was the biggest reason it failed? Was it bad football? Was it too much wrestling? Impossible expectations? And did the league deserve a second season to improve? I'm going to start off with Royce on this one.
I would have loved to have seen a second season. So I think they deserved a second season. I think what happened was it just confused if a football fan, a purist NFL football fan tuned in and had never seen like the previous USFL or any arena leagues, it was probably too far for them. And maybe like Mark was saying, maybe they wondered if it was scripted. And, I think it was, that probably helped kill it, because once they tune in and then tune back out again and don't watch another game, that probably dropped those ratings. And I think that sucks, because I would have loved to see more seasons, but that's what I suspect.
What about you, Mark? Picking back off of what Royce said about it, what would you take and consider as one of the biggest fails?
I think the biggest problem, and it actually goes to your list of questions, is they couldn't even answer those questions back then. Was it wrestling with football, or was it football with wrestling? Yeah. And that lack of a clear identity, like you said, we were both wrestling fans, but I didn't really get into it as much as you did, because I was all into the wrestling stuff. And once it really came down to the football, I was not nearly as interested. If you did the XFL and The Rock was the quarterback for a week, okay, I would tune into that. But these random players like He Hate Me, I wasn't creating an emotional attachment like I was during that time with the actual wrestlers. And, we talk about repressed memories. I mean, was it doomed to fail? I'd say, yeah, when their blimp kind of went down and hit a seafood restaurant before the season because Vince wanted to fly over an NFL game, I think that was kind of the sign that it was doomed to fail.
Forgot
what
about
that. You, Mike? What would you say was the biggest fail?
Man, I mean, what's the biggest fail? I think Mark nailed it, bro, with one word. This guy, just the man who's just so amazing with words. He just eloquently put it in one word: identity. That was it. The question is the answer in that regard. Like Mark said, it's what was it? We to this day we can debate all we want. Was it a side pet project for Vince to see if he could turn wrestling into football or football into wrestling? I think another critical part was, looking at it from the wrestling standpoint, right? We know this is a great example, and I'm sure you guys will know, maybe not Royce, but when AEW was founded, they went after one of the biggest names they possibly could at the time, that being Y2J, Chris Jericho. They sign a former undisputed WWE champion, 9-time Intercontinental champion. I don't know, Mark, how many tag titles did Jericho have? 4 or 5, whatever it is. Couple there in the mix, right? A perennial Hall of Famer. And he becomes the face of AEW. There was, He Hate Me was very popular, right? You had Maddox over there, he was pretty popular. What's his name? Kevin Donegal, right? Another, what was his name? The guy you showed in an intro clip, right? Names are, there you go. Yeah, perfect. I don't think they had like a true like star. Like if, like, say a guy
That's
from
true.
the NFL, say something crazy happened where Vince was able to convince, a big star of the NFL from the early 2000s to top ship to the XFL, maybe that would have helped legitimize them a little bit. Just a thought, right, from the wrestling standpoint of it.
Now, the cool thing is a couple guys like Tommy Maddox and Rod Smart, he hate me, both went on to, I have their cards, NFL cards. So, in fact, comeback player of the year was Tommy Maddox, played for the Steelers, had a great starting year for them. So it was cool to see that kind of come out of the XFL. But if they would have had those big names going in, even if it was a retired player, somebody, like bring over Mean Joe Green as a sideline reporter or something like that, that's a football tie-in, would have been awesome. So I think they were lacking that football tie-in for the football's like only fans. So yeah, I think, and the ego of Vince McMahon, he basically wanted to make himself bigger than the NFL, and that's just not a reality, but he thinks it is. Just he's kind of Trumpian in that way, he's got the biggest ego in the world. So yeah.
I didn't want to
I
say
will say-
Vince at
go
first
ahead,
there, because I figured that would be the cop out answer, and everyone would be like, that's the easy answer. You don't know nothing, But I mean, it's the God's honest truth. I mean, Vince is his own worst enemy. I think we've seen it literally play out. How many now? 35 years, literally his own worst enemy.
Yeah.
And I honestly, I mean, looking back, and as things would happen, I do think it was a little too much WWF, just because you have, I mean, I love JR, I love the King calling a wrestling match, but for them calling a football match just was so odd, and then you had Jesse Ventura almost trying to like argue with people, and it's like, I get what they were trying to do, but it's like, if they did have some credibility, I mean, this was NBC. It would be great if you had NBC people on there. I mean, you had Mike Adamy. Luckily, you didn't have to say Jeff Harvey. But, and it's funny, he actually did mispronounce one of the person's name in a live interview too. So it happened before he was live on wrestling. But it's just crazy to see that. I feel like, and I loved some of the teams. Just go back, some of the logos were just great and everything. But it was just, I think, too much. And I think, luckily, he learned from his mistakes. And then the XFL in 2020, you ask anyone in spring football, they're probably going to say that was kind of almost their favorite, because the way the teams were, the way they were playing, you had, they were in cities that didn't have football. They played in St. Louis, and so on. And the way everything looked, it felt different. And I honestly, I always will wonder, if COVID doesn't happen, what happens with that league.
I think it grows, man.
Yeah.
I went to a Seattle Dragons game and it was packed. It was crazy. And they only had 5 games that year, which is just a shame. But it was, every fan was into it. There were people dressed in dragon costumes, and all of the Game of Thrones was huge then. So all these Game of Thrones fans just joined in, and it was just awesome. So I'm glad I got to go to one of those and experience it, because live it was amazing.
Actually, Eric, speaking of locations, I know you're a big fan of where the different teams are coming from. Do you feel like that hurt the original iteration, because they avoided some of the bigger markets because they wanted real grass? So it kind of limited where they could position teams. Do you think that had an effect?
Yes and no. I mean, it's good you bring that up, because I forgot about that. But you're right. They had to go to Soldier Field. I remember one game, it was absolutely freezing for them, and they didn't know how to handle everything. What I did like was they did put a team in Los Angeles. You had the Los Angeles Express.
Extreme.
That was awesome. I mean, that kind of, I'm not going to say that's helped, NFL go back to Los Angeles, but it did, put things into place so they can kind of see how things work. I really liked how in San Francisco they played where the Giants played. And that was such an interesting experience, where I believe they actually brought stands in too, so they could see it and everything. And to me, that felt great, because it was so unique, and it really made it different, because what the stadium, what it looked like for baseball, and it had a different feel for it. But then you played at the Meadowlands, which was okay. But what they did too, I don't know if you guys remember this, but with us being wrestling fans, they almost had Titantrons. blocking off
Mhm.
like sections of the stadium with massive screens and everything, and pyro, so it almost was like its own stage, to help, oh well, we need to cover up a part of half the stadium. We're just going to throw a massive stage and have a tunnel for them to come out. So, but that's a really good point. I totally forgot that they really had to make sure it was all grass. And then you look at how things have passed now, where almost most teams in the NFL are playing on turf, and now there's a new report because of how the World Cup, they had to put soccer grass on some stadiums that had turf. Some of the NFL players are saying, "Hey, no, let's keep that because we prefer it more."
Right.
So, and mentioning that, there also the NFL players agreement has their contract's expiring soon, and I actually feel like that might be part of a thing going on it with the grass, because players prefer grass and feel like it's safer. So it's interesting to think of. You don't think of small stuff like that, but grass and turf. They made sure all the stadiums had grass, and now it might be something that turns into an issue when they do their labor agreement in a couple of years.
Wow. Not to go on a tangent here, but the fact that it's the year of 2026 and we're still not like all these leagues, NFL, these big leagues are playing on turf, and these guys are saying, like, look, hey, owner, billionaire owner, I've torn my ACL, 4 times on your turf. Maybe we should switch to grass. The guys are getting hurt a lot more frequently. When we play on the grass gives away. We get stuck in the ground, the ground got some give to it. Meanwhile, I get stuck in the turf. That's it. I tear my ACL. I tear my Achilles. Like, insane that we're not like 100% grass right now in the NFL. Just random.
Hashtag keep the grass.
Keep the grass.
And our last topic tonight, we're gonna go with legacy. So the original XFL's impact on spring football, the influence it had on future football broadcasts. It's not set in stone. Nothing was confirmed, but after they did the ESPN 30 for 30 on the XFL, they interviewed NBC Dick. I can't think of his last name. I don't know if you guys know off the top of your head. And they interviewed Vince, and after that, Vince started getting the idea. In 2008, he announced in 2020, I'm going to bring back the XFL. And Dick and his son decided to make their own football league called the AAF. And I know you guys don't, Mark and Mike, you don't know too much about the AAF. It basically was they ran out of money. They had no money to play players. They basically left players in their hotels and said thanks. So it was a very interesting situation, to say the least. But back to what I was talking about, with how other later leagues learned from its success and failures. We had the XFL return in 2020 and the evolution into today's UFL, which me and Royce covered. In the original XFL is remembered more for what it was or what it inspired. So I'm going to put this out there. So the questions are, did the original XFL fail, or did it plant the seed for everything that followed? Without the 2021 XFL, does spring football look like it does today? And if it wasn't wrestling involved and the league had been presented as a genuine football product, would it have survived longer than one season? And what's the biggest lesson learned going forward with spring football learned from the original XF? Why don't we have Royce? It's more football and bringing up all the leagues. Why don't you take it from there?
I think I'll start with the one I could remember, which was the last question, which what did we learn from it? And that, I think, is that you do need a football guidance as an overall. If you're going to have a football league, you have to at least have a consistent football leader, at least in the booth at a minimum. And then also, I would say in charge at some level. So, yeah, I think that's what they kind of, I learned their lesson with Oliver Luck in 2020, that they needed a football voice to guide them, because it did almost go too hard in the wrestling angle, and that kind of like it bombed it. So I don't, give me another one of your questions, because my memory is just shot right now.
So if it wasn't wrestling involved and the league had been presented as a genuine football product, would it have survived longer than one season?
Tough to say. I don't know, because it did bring in a big, huge chunk of wrestling fans. I think if they could have done a better job at blending the two, it could have lasted and given those wrestling fans that were hungry for something else and to cheer for some villains. I think it could have worked had they really given it more of a football feel instead of more of a wrestling feel. That's, I guess, the way I look at it.
What about you, Mike? Or anything that any of those questions jump off that you want to tackle?
Yeah, the legacy, right? What's a legacy, right? We remember it, right? It did leave an
Yeah.
impactful legacy, right? We're here we are. Like I said, 4 times, it's 2026. This is we're talking 2001, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
This is something that we still talk about, and we say, like, had they had done this better, maybe this had longevity. Maybe this would have lasted till 2005, 6, 10. Maybe it's still running today. It's a lot harder to say in hindsight, but I think if anything, the legacy was there. And I mean, like, it created a cult following. You had people, documentaries for how many years after, you had people still begging for that football product, 5 years, 6 years later, saying, man, I wish we had the XFL again. I wish we could see, scantily clad cheerleaders, and, we could see pyro and fireworks and, guys getting the absolute living. Can I curse on this platform?
Crap.
Let's say no.
Okay. Getting the ever living hell knocked out of them.
There you go.
Like, I used to watch, like, obviously I'm a little bit younger here, than you guys, and no dig, no jabs. But for me, the XFL, like, I have, like, minimal memories. Like, I remember my dad throwing it on and watching it and him reacting and us, like, watching that as, I'm 6, 7 years old. Right. And, but when I got older, I would go on YouTube, man, and I would watch, He Hate Me's best hits, best hits of the XFL compilation, like, and I'd spend hours upon hours just watching all the YouTube content I could find on the XFL and going, man, I wish the NFL was like this, and I think that's really what the legacy will be, is people will look fondly on it and be like, man, that was fun for the times, but man, Vince McMahon, what was he smoking? Like, I think that's the legacy of it, really.
And what about you, Mr. Mark?
So, it's hard. I don't want to get too philosophical here, but it's hard for me to consider it a failure if people learned from it and if the sport grew from it. Granted, you only had the one season. But as I said to start the show, it was a time of experimentation for the WWF. They never came out with another side-scrolling beat-em-up game like Betrayal. Tough Enough, though, did last for a few seasons. WWE Studios grew. They're still coming out with movies. So if you don't try new things, then you can't find success. So I wouldn't call it a failure. But if it didn't have the wrestling, I don't think it would have lasted that long anyways. I think we talked earlier, it was kind of an explosion, right? That wrestling was the big boom at the beginning that brought the eyeballs in. But if you're not feeding the flames, that fire is going to go out. And that's what happened. They didn't give us competitive football. They didn't keep our interest. And so it just kind of fizzled out. And they tried, they were going to do a second season, but Dick Ebersol backed out. Then UPN backed out. And so they just couldn't revive the embers. And so it just kind of sat there until they finally stoked the flames with that ESPN 30 for 30. So not a failure, because we learned from it. And wrestling was its biggest success, or biggest asset, I should say, and also its biggest downfall.
See,
Well said.
I'm probably gonna be weird on this, but I actually think for legacy, I think it did. As I went to college. I was on. I produced stuff. I tend to be on behind the camera more, and I like to think of what they did for football that is still current. I mean, I summed it up in the last segment. You had Skycam. They put that there. Now every single league is using it. I mean, they even use it for the World Cup. If they don't have Skycam, do you have it now in NFL? Would you have seen it at the World Cup? You have referees with microphones. I feel like the NFL adapted that. You had wire players. I mean, a lot of the stuff, media stuff wise, is now happening almost to a T across the board on every league. So I feel like now if you're looking at legacy from a standpoint of media wise, absolutely, I think that is the reason why some of the leagues have changed. I mean, granted, technology has advanced so much since '01. I mean, aspect ratio on a television is one. If you saw the graphic how it started, we're talking 4:3, and now you're watching stuff on YouTube right now. It's 16:9. But technology wise, I think it has a legacy that most people won't talk about, and I feel like that aspect definitely. For the rest, for everything else, I think it's more of, and Mike brings it up perfect, that we're still talking about this 25 years later. And to say this is crazy, we've been talking for almost an hour. We've had 42 people watching at least. We've had one heart. So there's still people looking at it. And granted, we're all from different aspects. You know, we have Mark, who does history. Mike, he goes to live events. He's on the panel for Four Sides, and Royce with the UFL. But to see us four guys come together and to have that many eyes on us right now shows me that there's still some interest from that. So I would say legacy-wise, I will say it was a success because things have changed and gotten better, and it was them trying things out, which kind of made it how it went.
It's a perfect piece of pop culture, frankly. It's a just gem hanging there. I love it. So I think it's going to be, and it did all those little subtle influences that are still happening today are a big piece of that. So it's almost like we get to extend that pop culture into now and maybe next year and next year. So it's fascinating to me to see that thread being woven through the whole thing.
Yeah. So I had this as a question. I think we already summed it up. In one sentence, what is the XFL's legacy? So, Royce, would you say it's pop culture?
Yeah, I think yes. It's just iconic, and just a massive. I think the bomb analogy is what it was. It was just a big bomb that dropped that woke us all up and made us think differently. And I think that's the legacy it gave. It just and kind of showed us, hey, you can do football a little bit differently. It doesn't have to be the NFL.
That's fantastic, poetic. Mike, what about you, bud?
In one sentence, man, I would say it gave us some massive hits and a bigger flop. You know, like we had, I like I said, I'm after this show's over, I'm going to go in my living room and turn on YouTube and look up XFL's biggest hits, and I'm gonna watch that 30-minute video to completion because I have to. You know, I have no choice because now I have bloodlust. Now I need to see dudes getting speared out of their socks and their cleats.
You know, Mike T. Bell, he's the panelist for us, and he summed it up. XFL 1.0 gave personality to football and the importance of entertainment to sports, and I agree with him there. And Mr. Mark, what do you got? One sentence.
I think the XFL represented the evolution of both professional wrestling and football. And for a short period of time, they came together, and then they branched off, and then years later, they found each other once again.
Nice.
You know, you're saying that, and all I could think of is Italian dressing. Where Italian dressing is separated, and you shake it up, and it goes together, and then it separates again.
Well, wrestling and football always had a connection. You know, you think back to WrestleMania 2, there was the NFL Battle Royal, and it was a few NFL guys, including the Fridge, William Perry, and a bunch of WWF superstars. And throughout the years, you saw it, and then there was a lull. And now recently, we just had Tom Brady interviewed by Cody Rhodes at Fanatics Fest, right? Wrestling and football have come back together, and they've always kind of, ran parallel, and every so often they come together and then they separate again. So it is like Italian dressing. Every so often you just got to shake things up.
It's awesome.
Something you just said, I don't know if you watched the end of SummerSlam that just happened for the WWE this past weekend, but they were interviewing Roman Reigns, and he's like, "This is where I got cut," he had to retire because of leukemia. And then you also had, it was Minnesota where Brock Lesnar played for them. So it's very interesting too how your current big names also had ties in with football. John Cena. I went to Springfield College. He was the starting center for Springfield College when he played for them. So it's just crazy to see that, and it's almost like you said it summed it up perfect. It's almost like football and wrestling are kind of just meant to be together sometimes.
And your boy from the Ravens, Braun Breaker, baby, played for your Ravens.
And Stacy Keibler was a Ravens cheerleader.
Stacy Keibler was a Ravens cheerleader.
Bill Goldberg, Mongo McMichael. We can keep going.
Yeah.
Well, I do remember in the 80s you had Brian Bosworth crossover and do some wrestling and stuff like that. I mean, it was huge, that crossover football wrestling. It works.
Yeah.
LT.
So I don't want to keep everyone here any longer. We have hit the 1 hour mark, but I really appreciate everyone coming here tonight. I'm going to start out with Mike. Since your show is tomorrow night, plug it. You can say what you got to say.
I mean, I'm kind of, shout out to Rick, and thank you for having me on the show. And I may not be the most knowledgeable when it comes to the XFL, but it was great to just get to talk, about it with you guys. You guys can catch Four Sides of the Ring live tomorrow, 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, on Four Sides of the Ring YouTube. You can also catch me over with my good brother Shadow on the Shadow Sphere. We talk some wrestling, we talk life, we talk content creation, we talk about raccoons. That'll be dropping. So tomorrow, I'm with Rick tonight and I'm Mike tonight, but tomorrow I'm going to be Rick Rude because I'm going to be in two places at the same time.
I really hope tomorrow night on Four Sides you have a raccoon hat like
Davy Crockett. Yeah.
We got him. Here he is. Here he is.
What about you, Royce? Tell us where we can find you and everything.
Look up Viking Wax Press. I'm on X, YouTube, Facebook. Mainly, I do a ton of football-related content, football card-related content, or helmet-related content. I rank helmets of all different leagues. So check out YouTube and find my videos there.
And Mark, finish it up
All right.
for us.
So this is the first season of Booking Like a Mark that we're on YouTube. And we are coinciding with the big wrestling pay-per-views of 2001 during the Invasion storyline that we're covering. So our next episode will be 2 weeks from tonight on the 19th, and we will be rebooking SummerSlam 2001. So find us on YouTube, find us on X, and every so often we post on Instagram, but mainly X.
And I'm Rick Apid, part of the Alternative Football Panel. We do UFL stuff. The NFL season's coming up. I'm doing Tecmo. I'm happy to announce too, I don't know if anyone knows this, but Tecmo, whoever has played, they have figured out a hack, so now you have the full 18-game season. Unfortunately, I work tomorrow, but I plan on tomorrow night starting the season up to see how it is. They even made the graphics where if you're playing it on like a television, it actually takes up your full screen or something.
Oh, sick.
So I'm going to be doing NFL predictions this year. Definitely the Thursday night games. So we'll be having some more stuff out like that. So just appreciate everyone coming tonight, talking the XFL, and take a look at everyone's content here. Royce, Mike, and Mark's excellent. They do fantastic work. Pleasure to have everyone here tonight, and look forward to seeing everyone on their shows. Enjoy your night, and check your pulse to make sure you're still breathing, because this is the XFL.
Nice job, Rick. Thanks, man.
Hell yeah.